Well, hello, Andrew Clay Schaefer here, the DevOps witch doctor, mad scientist, again, organizing DevOps Days Pittsburgh, and I'm joined today by a special guest. It's one of our sponsors, but he's also responsible for contributions to the DevOps lore, DevOps narrative. He's worked on quite a few tools you're probably familiar with. I'm here with Michael DeHaan. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more.
Hey, thanks for having us, Andrew. Yeah, so I've been involved in kind of the DevOps automation space for a while. Built Cobbler back when I was working for Red Hat. We did Funk, which was kind of one of the early sort of orchestration-y command blasting tools of the day. Some cloud prototypes and things like that, and most recently Ansible. So yeah, really happy to be here and to be sponsoring DevOps Days and getting to know more people.
So you guys make Ansible. Just to start off, one of the things I've been asking everyone is, what is DevOps to you? When you hear this word, DevOps, what does that mean?
Yeah, so DevOps is an incredibly hard word to define, right? So in the beginning, back when there was Cobbler and people were using CF engines and puppets and chefs, and we started to think about Funk, and those ideas led to eventually led to Ansible and all those things. It was a lot about automation and how can we be better admins and developers. But I think one of the core tenets is really that it's developers wanting to learn more about operations and operations learning to be more about development. But those roles are also like increasingly blending over time to where people are wearing multiple hats, and that's a really nice thing to see. A lot of people are talking about cultural things. And then there's also this increasing thing, which is what really excites me in the open source space, which is people helping people across organizational boundaries, whether that's contributing to the same projects, or there's a giant wave of DevOps meetups where people are saying, here, let me teach you about Graphlite, or let me teach you about maybe Ansible, or what are the latest tooling, or how do I manage my agile process? So it's kind of an umbrella term about whatever you want it to make it to be, which is kind of a nice thing, and they're all
good and bad. It's the good part and the bad part.
Yeah.
So one of the things you just mentioned, which is to me important in this DevOps story, is this notion of sharing, and the fact that both inside of a company, sharing information between these different roles, but in this global community of practice, the fact that I'm connected to all these people that can solve all these problems or have solved problems I haven't solved, and can have access to them, through email lists, IRC, at some point as you build relationships, just instant messaging. Like that changes the game, because you could draw on like this global community of practice and that knowledge that's ingrained in people who did a lot of things you are trying to solve, and you didn't have that before.
Exactly. I think there's an entirely new rate of multiplication at which new tools and approaches are coming to be now, and you think a lot of it is because the exchange of ideas is easier. So in the first days that Ansible existed, even the first year or so, I didn't actually present it anywhere, which was, I like presenting things, but I didn't, and it was because ideas are spreading over the internet. GitHub has been a big game changer for us. That even that wasn't as even a factor in 2000 early on as much, when you had to do open source on all these discrete mailing lists, right? So now
GitHub changed open source. The dynamics of being able to just send pull requests and see everything in the open, because there were definitely open source projects that had a lot of momentum and a lot of communities before GitHub, but GitHub definitely just poured gas on that fire.
Absolutely, and I think that's really great, because it's you can see what everybody else is doing. It's making it more consistent how people contribute. So all communities have their idiosyncrasies, but it's now becoming more about the ideas, and the barrier for no matter where you are in the world or what your level of education, who you're working for is, to get something started and get exposure is just so much lower now, which is fantastic.
That's one of the points I've been trying to get across to people is no matter where you are, if you have an internet connection and you want to learn how this stuff works, you have at your disposal all the tools that were needed to build Google, to build Amazon, to build Facebook. Like, you have that stuff.
Absolutely.
At your fingertips.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a sponsor, I want to kind of highlight Ansible's story, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about Ansible's evolution and some of the choices you made that might be different than some of the other options.
Yeah, absolutely. I've obviously encountered a lot of users using a lot of different automation tools over the years, and there's a lot
And
of
you actually worked at Puppet Labs for a while.
I did. I did product management for them for a while, and it was a good experience. Got to meet a lot of great users and things like that. But what I really wanted to do is kind of focus on application deployment, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and looking at things kind of like a multi-server perspective. But one of the other things was to build a system that didn't require managing a lot of management agents on the remote machines. So from a security perspective, from a lack of an overhead of having to deal with certificate management and things like that. We started Ansible basically based on the idea of let's build something using SSH and let's build something using YAML and have a really simple language, but design it from the idea that from the beginning it's not just going to solve configuration management, but it's also going to, if you want to, replace things like Fabric or Capistrano as well, and kind of break down these arbitrary lines between config management and app deployment and rolling updates and see, can you build one tool that can take you all the way from provisioning through that life cycle. But focusing mostly on the agentless part, I think has been interesting for us. I think it's what makes it the most unique. And because of that kind of push-based architecture, it's able to do really fine-grained lists of things, like do this here, then do this over here, now go back over here, do this if this is true, save this in a variable, those kind of things, making those like a little bit easier, which it's been really interesting to watch us take off and see how many people that were kind of looking for those kind of tools.
So just, I haven't spent a lot of time doing any like real deployments with Ansible. So how do you, when you're agentless and you SSH and something's missing, how do you report or how do you handle those kind of transient?
Sure. So the way that Ansible works is it transfers modules to the remote machines. So when you say SSH, a lot of people think it's going to log in and run chown or whatever, but it doesn't do that. It uses SSH as a communication channel. So it'll move a module to the remote end, and that module emits JSON in response. And that module will ensure that the state of the system is like you want it to be. So for good or ill, the idempotence applies, right? And then we just keep track of what hosts have failures, and if they have failures, we take them out of the rotation. We don't talk to them again. And it produces a nice report at the bottom when you're done of how many changes got made on each host and which ones had problems.
Interesting. So yeah, there's a bunch of interesting questions. It's probably an hour-long podcast we could do on how to actually do orchestration across non-trivial infrastructure. Rolling upgrades and continuous integration. We should probably do that podcast.
That would be cool.
But not today. So then, just kind of close it out. What do you, as Ansible, and you have this background in open source. How do you see your relationship to these community events like DevOps Days, and why do you sponsor DevOps Days, and what do you feel like you get out of that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously when we get out there and meet people, you guys are where all the ideas come from, absolutely. So Ansible has like 710 contributors now or something like that. So all the ideas and what we do is driven based on how can we make people's lives easier, and I personally, what I get out of it is I like to hear about all the workloads people are deploying, whether that's a bank or render farm or what have you. It's always really cool to hear those stories, but mostly it's sharing. It's what builds our stuff, right? It's all where all the ideas come from.
Absolutely. And then one other quick thing, which I probably should ask you earlier, but when you have the background that you have and you see all these other tools, like how much of your thought processes are influenced by everything else that's going on, and how does that push your project forward?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that's a lot of the whole thing that have changed from open source land is seeing all the background of what other people are doing and tools, and then we do feed off them. To some extent, Ansible doesn't try to look a lot at particular other implementations, because I wanted to kind of say, how if I could revisit this and do this differently and build something that was more services-based versus systems-based, how do we get those things going? But ultimately, it's a large feeding pool of ideas, and that's one of the greatest things about open source is what we're doing is not just allowing people to change things, but kind of accelerating that rate of change, and everybody to say, hey, why can't we do this? Or here's this really cool idea. So one of our coolest contributions, somebody made Jerome Wagner made this really cool patch that sped us up by like almost twice as fast for the SSH transport. And just being able to enable surprises is, I think, one of the greatest things that open source does.
Being able to enable surprises. That's a great line. Well, we're looking forward to seeing Ansible at DevOps Days Pittsburgh, and I'll let you get back to work, but thanks for your time.
All right, thank you very much.
Cheers, Michael.